Welcome to Broker Compliance. Hi there. Can everyone hear me okay?
Hear you loud and
Yes, ma'am.
clear.
Perfect. How's everyone doing today?
Working on it. I got shots of espresso to get me going. So,
Okay. All right. You beat me. I'm at like three. So, you know, caffeine tolerance, caffeine tolerant people are my people. So,
yeah, I get that.
all right. We are going to go ahead and get started. I'll start by sharing my screen and let's see. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So today we're going over listing agreement and CMA. So we're going to start with the CMA. The CMA is the easiest because we start with the CMA and then we can plug in the numbers from the CMA into our listing agreement. I think I've seen most of you on my class before. So as always, feel free to chime in, take yourself off mute, ask questions during the class, or feel free to share any insight you have, ask any questions. I like it to be kind of an open forum. I'll go over the compliance, share a little insight, but also I like participation. It makes it a lot more fun for me and for you guys as well, instead of just me talking for an hour about listing agreements. So we will go ahead and get started. So a CMA, I want to share this with you guys. I typed it in Chat GPT, how to do a listing, like a CMA checklist. And they spit this out and it's actually pretty good. I didn't go in and revise it or anything. So some of we always have to fact check our Chat GPT, but I really like this. So step one, verify the subject property data. So before pulling comps, you have to make sure the address, parcel number, bed, bath, and square footage, because sometimes when we are taking a listing, it might not match. So we might walk through a property and it looks like it says 4 bedrooms, and then we pull up property and it's only zoned as a 3 bedroom. And so you just want to double check and confirm square footage, bed, bath, if there's an ADU or any additions. And so confirming that is important when pulling comps. Um, Lot size zoning, making sure it's, what the zoning is, if it's residential or, if it falls into a kind of funky type zoning. Your built, property style, any unique features, like I was saying, if there's a pool, upgrades, ADU, etc. Condition level too. So that's important, because that is going to play when we pull comps, and what we look at factually and what the data shows is one thing. And sometimes you'll see, like, wait a minute, these don't make sense, right? But then you start looking and pulling information from these different properties, and you'll see, oh, okay, this one was a total fixer. This one was a probate sale. This one is a distressed property. This one was a total remodel and had these upgrades. And so it's going to take into account, addition to the value of some of this, the comps, or kind of a decrease in some of the comps. And so that's also important to note when you are, running a CMA for clients. Review MLS history. That's always huge, to see if it was, when it was listed. It's a lot easier to pull comps on something that's already in MLS because you just click pull comps and it's kind of already input there. So HOA fees, Melrose, special assessments, define the market area, neighborhood, subdivision boundaries, school districts. School districts, important. One school district versus a neighboring school district could mean the difference of either Melrose or, school ratings being a lot higher in one versus the other. So that does affect marketability and value. Proximity to freeways. Appraisers do look at that. If it is abutting the freeway but facing the freeway, they do take off more than if it's just facing, if it's not facing the freeway. So that they do take that into consideration if it's in close proximity to a freeway. Um, Property data, compare them. Appraisers will look at sold properties only within the last 90 days and a 1 mile radius. If it is a rural property or unique type property, then they'll go out further and expand the criteria. But for the purposes of the appraiser, their criteria is 1 mile, 90 days, and similar age, beds, baths, etc. That's what I like to start with, pulling comps, unless it's a unique type property. You can go back further. You can go back further. What I like to do is I'll maybe go back a little further, just showing days on market, especially in this type of market. It's because we're longer days on market. We are not looking at these 2 weeks or these quick. I will preface that by saying some properties do go in quickly, which we have no really rhyme or reason. However, average days on market has significantly increased, and so that will help prepping your client for expectations of what to expect. And so I'll go back further and say, look, here's what sold in the last 6 months. Here was, maybe Christmas time, it's a little longer. Here's springtime. And however, here's the average days. Here's what to expect. I wish it would sell in, 2 days. However, that's not what the market's dictating right now. Here's historically, and here's what we're showing. So here's what to prepare for. We hope for the best, but be realistic in our expectations, and what the market's dictating, supply and demand right now. And we're switching into a buyer's market. But for pulling comps, that's the data right there. Pending and active comps, if there are limited comps for an appraiser, they will use pending or active. It's better to have sold and actually see the data that is there and available, and see what people are actually paying for, what has actually closed. But those also support, so that when you're showing your client these, I like to show my client, here's our competition. So here's what has actually sold. Here's the data. Here's what's showing what it sold for. This person paid this appraised, they financed it, done deal. Okay. Pending is, we don't know what it's going to close at, right? We don't know, it's pending. Hopefully it'll close for, list price, but we don't know. And then active, I like to add that into my CMA to show what other properties other buyers are looking at. So this is what I like to call the competition. So where does your property line up compared to this one? Because you have a 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot in this neighborhood. Here's another 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot in this neighborhood. Where do you think your property, how do you think it compares? Because the buyers that are touring that property are going to look at yours also. So this is what they're looking at. So I add those into my CMA, and I call it the other properties or the competition properties and what they're going to be looking at. And it helps the client to set the expectation of, okay, this property is probably going to be a hot property. It's vacant, so it's easier to show, right? It's fixed up, it has, amenities, it has, it's staged. Here's a property that's going to look great. What do you want to do with your property? Where do you think that falls in line? So that's a really good indicator when I'm doing the CMA, why I like to add the actives in there. Exclude, yeah, there's some properties you want to exclude. Some of the, if your house or your listing that you're taking is a gorgeous, immaculate home that looks like a model home when you walk through, and there's a distressed property that's, in foreclosure, with tenants, and there's, garbage outside, and it's fenced, and there's a dog running around and nobody can get to it. Yeah, that's not going to be a great comp. And so you could probably exclude that comp, or you can add it and say, hey, here on this scale, this is a comp on the low end. You can show it to scale, or you could just take out comps that don't apply. And again, analyze the market conditions. I was talking about it being a buyer's market. Technically, it's a seller's market still, but it feels a lot more like a buyer's market. It's really in this kind of funky, weird market where some sellers are like, this is seller's market, and highest and best, multiple offers, and then some properties are sitting for 55, 60 days on the market, with no offers. And so it really is in that transition market, going from a seller's market, which we have had for a very long time. We've been in a seller's market for extremely long time with, a lot of buying power, low interest rates. Interest rates are higher now than they have been historically. They're average. However, coming off of that 2-3% buying frenzy, we're now going into a buyer's market, so buyers can be more picky. And so that is a good thing to discuss with your client as well. So, hey, the market is switching into a buyer's market. And then you can discuss strategy when you're going over these conditions. Like, look, we can price it low, because we still are seeing some, there's buyers out there. Make no mistake about that. There are still buyers out there actively shopping. They're pickier because if they're going to pay 6 or 7% interest rate on a house that's priced historically high with inflation, they want to make sure that it is the right house. And so they're going to be more particular. And we've seen, historically the biggest amount of cancellations because buyers will cancel. They'll say, actually, you know what? I like this house over here. Let me cancel. Or, I don't like the condition of this house. And so they're being more particular because they can. Because right now the power is shifting to the buyer's power as opposed to the sellers where it was before. It was like, take my firstborn. You can have whatever you want. No contingency. I don't care. We'll pay the appraisal gap if there is one. But now it's shifting over. So going over those market conditions and setting expectations for the client. What I like to show is average days on market. Here's the average days on market. Here's what we can expect. We can expect in your market, in your area, we can expect, here's the average days on market. Our average days on market is 30 days, right? Or if it's 60 days in that particular neighborhood, setting that expectation. And then the list to sales price ratio is also a huge thing to point out as well. So if we're pricing it at price, but if we're at 97% list to sales price ratio, okay, they're getting under list price. So you can expect to get an offer under list price, right? And then again, inventory levels, buyer or seller's market, those are all important things to analyze when you're looking at comps, and when you're doing your listing presentation and having a candid conversation with your seller. But it's better to go in with facts. I did a listing presentation. I'm like, hey, here's our average days on market's 45 days. And she's like, well, this one sold in 6 days. And
Right.
no, the one that sold in 6 days. And I'm like, yes, but that one was priced extremely low. You want to make all these improvements and you want to get the most bang for your buck. So we can go that route. We can absolutely, I can price it low and we can hope and pray that we get a bidding war and go higher if that's a strategy you want to take, because that's a strategy they took. But they want to point out the one. So great. I hope I would be more than happy to sell it in 6 days. However, being realistic, I'm always hopeful, but I'm also realistic. So yes, that would be fantastic. The first buyer walks in and they're like, this is my dream home. I love it. Full price offer, 21-day close, great. But realistically, and setting those expectations of the market based on your research, your analysis, and a good CMA will help set those expectations of reality, right?
And Lisa, one thing that I have noticed too is that before buyers were very anxious to get that offer out, whereas now they're sitting on it a little bit longer. And
Yeah.
generally, it's the seller is doing a modification of price and reducing it after like 2 to 3 weeks, like they've already preempted those conversations.
Yeah.
So those are kind of, and then when you get there, I've been seeing about two offers, two, on average. So
Yeah.
it's healthy and it's moving, but
Yeah, it's different though,
it's
right?
very different.
We're in the middle of the transition. So the
Yeah.
transition's always a little, I don't know, for lack of a better word, funky. So
Yeah.
you'll see you price it, and then you get multiple showings and offers. And then
Yeah.
you'll list a fantastic property, and then you get a couple of showings trickling in and not as much. And you're like, okay, well, what's going on with but it's just the market, and it's just the transition of the market going from the seller's market to the buyer's market. But yeah,
Yeah.
I agree, Charlene. It is a healthier market. It does feel a little bit more stable. It's just there's some weird, curveballs, I'd say, that are,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I would say though, when you find a property and you come in with a healthy, strong offer, it's not going into the bidding wars and all it's just a clean, strong offer if you come in and it
yeah,
works out well on the buying side.
yeah, absolutely. I'd agree. Yeah, it does feel better for buyers too. It's not that pressure,
Right.
or I'm like, look, if you see it, we better write it. And, let's hang tight at Starbucks. Let's get it out right now. Like I'm going to send in this offer around the corner and
Yeah.
we need to get it in by, we have 36 minutes to submit the highest and best offer and, what are terms. And now it's like, okay, let's look at this. Let's review. And
Yeah.
there's not that huge rush to get it in. So it does
There
feel a little,
really isn't. There's a lag there now. It's not
yeah.
like right when you go, it's like thinking about it and it's still being on market. And so it is a bit different.
Yeah. And I'm seeing two buyers like, let's circle back to this property. And
Right.
they're like, actually, let me think about that one. Let's look,
Yeah.
can we see if we can write an offer on that one after, and they're still on the market. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
little bit better for the buyers. But on the seller side also, it's like, why is it not selling? Well, it's been 2 weeks and we're priced at list price, like at the
Yeah.
value. So and days on market are 45 to 55 days. So let's just breathe, hang tight. It's not nothing's going on. So, oh, Michael.
Yeah, the last three listings I've had a good quarter, first quarter. I learned long ago from a agent I respect is find that midline price, the list
Yes,
price in the
yes.
comps, and then can talk to the owners, the sellers, and say, what I tend to do is I drop it 3 to 5% just as a habit.
Yeah.
And literally all three of these listings were in contract within 8 days.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
first one, the first one was actually in contract in 3 days with multiple offers.
Look, this is how mommy
Love
works.
it.
I actually thought maybe I way under price under listed the properties, but they went really well and the sellers were very happy.
Good, good. And that's great that you were able to instill that confidence of yourself into the sellers. And so they listened to you and they said, yes, let's take this strategy. Great job. Sometimes sellers are not realistic, so then we get stuck with, hey, look, I will do what you need me to do because I work for you. You are the principal, I'm the agent. However, I highly recommend this strategy. However, would you be willing if I'm telling you, here's what I think it's going to sell at? In a couple weeks, if we're not seeing offers or showings, are you willing to drop the price down the 3 to 5%, like I mentioned at the start, if we're not getting traction? If we're not getting showings in this market, then something's wrong. If we're getting showings, but no offers, that's the market right now. However, if nobody's walking in the door, we have a problem. Would you be willing to do a price drop after 2 weeks? Like I'll go with your price, no problem, Michael. We'll list it at 500,000. However, I think 485 is a lot stronger. Would you be willing in a couple weeks, if we don't get offers, to go lower? And having that conversation, because sellers don't always listen to us. They think sometimes they know better. And, I'm like, okay, it's gonna be, it's gonna be up to you. Here's my advice. And, and then they sometimes will realize quickly that, oh, okay, yeah,
My last seller just owned the house so much. It was a family house and she visited when she was a little girl and her dad lived there. Her dad passed away there. The stepmother passed away there. And she just was I was so hard. I couldn't negotiate anything because she wanted she painted inside and out. She had replaced the electrical panel. She did everything, spent tons of money. And luckily, because she owned it, I mean, I was with her at a signing table and she cried. It
yeah,
was like,
yeah,
all right, Teresa, I hear what you're saying. High D, high C as well.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So yep. Market conditions. Any questions on this before we move on?
I do have a quick question. So for
Sure.
me, generally, when I'm in my listing consultation and I know that they're trying to drive the price higher than the recommended value, um, I generally try to set out a plan where we agree to let the market correct itself in 2 weeks and have an agreed upon term of the reduction in price in two
Yeah.
weeks, and then have a reduce, in maybe 5 weeks, like have those conversations.
Yeah.
So is that something that you recommend? Because that's what
Yeah.
I've been doing because it's easier than being on market and having those conversations, you know, into the
Absolutely. I like having those conversations up front,
okay.
because the sellers are there's a lot of uncertainty. It's a really complex. I mean, even the brand new agents here, you're just learning this, right? And it's going to take a couple before you get really comfortable. We'll picture a seller who they've never, they bought the house maybe 10 years ago. It was a whirlwind of, providing information. They've maybe probably never sold a house. Maybe at the most they've sold three houses in a lifetime, right? So it's confusing, it's complex, and sometimes sellers will fill in the blanks with questions. If they have uncertainty, they'll fill in the blanks. Say, "Well, Charlene, you didn't tell me this up front." Well, I didn't know. And then those questions kind of start swirling around, and then it's you didn't tell me. Right. Instead of having the harder conversations up front and setting the expectations, I find it a lot easier when the sellers are educated as much with the potential pitfalls
Yeah.
without scaring them, but setting the tone and setting those expectations versus, yep, okay, we listed it, great. And then they never hear from the listing agent. They never hear from the agent. Are like, oh my gosh, we have no offers. And then there's a question mark. And then there's a blank, right? And then they fill in the blank with fear.
Okay.
Fill in the blank, and they're talking to the neighbors and they're talking to their coworkers. And then a coworker who bought a house, 15 years ago is like, well, you should do this. And then they start filling in information from outside sources because we didn't let them know up front. And so it's always best that we are the source of the information instead of having, and that takes time though. And so for the newer agents on here, that does take a little bit of time to do to get that confidence, because sometimes it feels like the client's running the show, and it sometimes feels like you don't want to lose the deal. And so it's teetering that line, and that will come with, experience, practice, doing scripts and dialogue with other agents, having those conversations. Because I probably because I've been doing this, 25 years, it's not scripts or dialogues, it's just the truth. It's just, okay, hey, look, yes, this is what the market is, take it or leave it. It's not, I don't feel like it's a difficult conversation to have, just because it's what it is, right? I'm being honest, I'm being truthful, I'm looking at the data, I'm saying, and I'm conveying that information over to the seller, and that's kind of what it is. But I know for new agents, I remember being a new agent and being, terrified to take my first listing because I didn't want to lose it. Because I'm in the door, right? I got my listing. Do they know more than me? They probably do about the neighborhood, because the sellers know everything about their neighborhood and they know everything. And so it can sometimes feel like the dynamics, shifted, but it's just gaining that confidence, working on your scripts, working on your dialogue, being confident in the data that you pulled, to be able to present that, and just being open and honest and like, hey, yes, of course, we want to sell it as quick as possible. Here's a strategy, and then, going from there. Okay. Let's move on to the actual pulling of the CMA. Where am I at? Oh, here we go. I just pulled it off the hot sheet, my local hot sheet. A property here. It is in a subdivision here. Okay, so there's multiple ways that you can pull a CMA. So I'm going to do, and I'm not going to take a ton of time with doing it on how to do it, because there's a lot of different ways. I'll show you the compliant way to do it. That way, when you upload it, or your TC uploads it, that it is compliant. And so one way to do that is you can, if it was a listing previously, and it was listed previously on MLS, it will have the listing information here. Now, what you can do is, if you go right over here, it has a really convenient little tab and it says find comps. Okay, so our comps are going to get pulled. And we have one closed one here, and then we have a canceled one. Okay, so I don't really like these. It's not as much information as I'd like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to revise my criteria. And I'm going to go a little further out because it's a quarter mile. So I'm going to go half mile out. And residential, single family residence, I'm going to pull out some of these. I'll add those in. I'm gonna take off hold. I'll leave the pendings. I'll leave the closed. I'm gonna take out expired. I'm gonna take out expired pending, canceled, duplicate canceled. Okay, so that'll be pending. I'm leaving in that information. I like to start wide and then kind of close in from there. So we'll see what we pull up when we do this. All right. And now I'm going to search, see what we come up with. Okay, so this is a little bit better. So our list price is $550. And look at these days on market, guys. This is what I was talking about. 3 days, 25 days, 57 days, 6 days, 55 days. So this is the crazy market that we're in right here. All right. So we're all 3 beds, 2 baths, square footage. So our subject property is bigger. So 2,093 square feet, not significantly, but bigger. You know, it's the biggest one here. And it's at 550. So I would say that it probably supports the comps. What I would do then is I would go in and click on each one of these. And I'm going to take a look at Bridalwood. Okay, what was going on with Bridalwood? Why did it sell for $464 for 3 days on the market? Well, clearly that was underpriced, right? Because that's the lowest price one by far. 510. Okay, probably a good comp, but square footage is going to be lower than this. And this is an area that has lakes and different views. And so I'd go in and I'd click around, right? So I'd click at each one of these. I'd see what's going on. This one, 594, 6 days on the market. So, oh, it has an optional 4th bedroom here, 1,800 square feet. So that's why it's on the higher end. And then 685. 3 bed, 2 bath. So this is probably a Lakeview one. So this is what I do. So then I go in, I click through all of these, right? And then you can you could create a CMA there. So one of the, so this is just a quick MLS way to do it. Another way I like to do it is using Cloud CMA. This seems a lot easier. I use Cloud CMA or RPR, but I don't want to confuse everyone with the, you know, the different so many different ways of doing it. So I will just add it in here. What's our address? 4093. Okay. There we go. 3 bed, 2 baths. All right. Now, I like to do this, the quick and dirty, automatically find listings near subject property, get at least 10 listings. I don't like to go back a year. Let's just do 3 months and fetch our listings. And I like using Cloud CMA. It has a fantastic map here that shows, see, like I was saying, this has a lake area. So there's some that are, you know, obviously prices a little bit higher around the lakes, the different areas here. So, so then I'd go through here. Low 464, median price 515, average 528, high 685. So that gives us a good indication. And then we'd go through each one of them. Like I said, pulling, you can add or take away, and then you can customize the report. So this is the one I use. So I use this, I pull this sheet when I do my listing, when I have my client sign the listing agreement, I have a 1-page PDF of this that I send with the listing agreement. It attaches to it. They sign the listing agreement, and then I have them sign the CMA along with that and the seller's net sheet. So I do all 3 of those. It just makes it a lot easier. That way up front, the client, you've had the discussion about the listing, the terms of the listing agreement. You've had a discussion about the price, the full CMA, and then you've had a discussion about the seller's net sheet, so the estimated proceeds. Now that one can change depending on a lot of times we don't have the payoff demand up front of their existing mortgage. And so it can just be a guesstimate, say, what's the approximate balance of your mortgage? And, you can quickly, if you have a mortgage, you just look online and it'll have the estimate value. It's not the payoff amount, but that'll give you a good indication, say, what's the approximate balance? If it's paid off, great, because then there's zero balance there and it's a lot easier to do that net sheet. But I like to do, I do the report and then I will pull out, like I said, I'll pull out the one page, attach it to the listing agreement, and then I will have my client sign it.
Which page do you pull out? The first page of PDF?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, so this pulls a full report, and so there's and it's working on it right now, so it's saying it's publishing. But there's one page, so I'll separate it out from the entire this 'cause there's like, I don't know, 50 pages or something that happens when you publish this. But I pull the page that it looks exactly like the page that we just looked at with the map, and it has the listings below.
That makes sense. Okay.
This is being really slow. Okay, let's see if we can view this here. Okay, so it pulls the CMA. And there's tons of information here. Okay, so this page here, let's split it off into two pages. So here, and summary of comparable properties. So there's two pages on this one. And then I would just add those over to the listing agreement when they sign it. And that way your file is in compliance. And so, yeah, and I like this one too. And then they'll have a copy of it and they'll be able to see. So if you have those discussions later on, say, the CMA that we discussed, you have a copy of it, because they will receive a copy of it. I also do this though in my listing presentation. I always bring a physically printed and bound listing presentation so that they have a copy of it. And this is also in that listing agreement when we have our discussions. And so they have a copy of it, and then they have another copy of it here as well when they sign it. Okay. All right. Now we're going to go into any questions on this before we move on to the actual listing agreement. Okay. Let's get switched over. So the type of listing agreement, so you will see if you go in here. So I am in, for those of you that are new, I'm in Zip Forms, so CAR, so car.org, and then you go into Zip Forms, and then this is where all of your properties live. All of your listings, all of your buyer agreements, this is where all the contracts live right here. So there are different types of listing agreements. We use the exclusive listing agreement. There is an open or non-exclusive listings. Those are for just a standard. If your client hires you to sell their house, you want to be the exclusive person listing it. If it's open, you're not the only listing agent. They're giving you an opportunity, but also could be contracted with other agents as well. It's considered an open listing, so you can advertise the property, you can put on MLS. However, if you don't bring the buyer, you don't get paid the commission. And so for the purposes of this, if you ever run across a situation, run it by me first. If it's ever anything other than an exclusive listing agreement, just run it by me. That way we can kind of walk through it and walk through all the terms and things like that. But residential exclusive listing agreement is the form that we use. Okay, let's see. So of course, I mentioned that all the trainings, the disclosure regarding agency relationship is always the first form, because the client has to certify and verify and be made aware of the working relationship before they sign the contract. So that is why it is the first page. This is the general one. It goes in terms of seller's agent, buyer's agent duties, agent representing both, and seller and buyer responsibilities, because they do have responsibilities as well. And then attached is all the civil codes here and information. All right, now we're getting into the residential listing agreement. Okay, the date, if you don't have a date in there and you click the date, it automatically populates. It makes it a lot easier. Seller's name, check to see when you're taking the listing, I like to check beforehand to see, well, I ask the client who is on the property. Are there any other owners on the property except for yourself? Is it in a trust? So getting that information, and then you can also pull ownership information from, you can do from title companies, give you access to that, or from, I use RPR, which we have as well, and that will pull ownership and deed and see who's on the property as well. So just confirm that before you do, before you take the listing. If it isn't a trust, be sure that you have all the trust documents up front, that we don't run into an issue later on. Okay, seller. So if there's any sellers, let's say we have one seller on property. So the seller, brokerage, our broker, property address, city, county, zip code, APN, the parcel number, listing period. So beginning today's date, and we can go 6 months out, especially in this market. If it takes, 60 days to get a property into contract, and then it takes another 30 days to close escrow, or maybe that you have a buyer in contract and it falls out and goes into contract again, that gives you enough window. If the seller again, there's no set amount of time, anywhere between 3 to 6 months is normal, 3 on the low end. I've taken 30-day before. I've taken actually a lot of my expireds that I've called on and taken are very short terms because they're like, all right, either we're going to sell it or not. I'm like, just give me 30 days. Give me 30 days, and if not, then we'll cut ties and it's fine. So there's no set amount, but normal's between 3 to 6 months. Anything more than that, unless it's a very unique property. I think Charlene, you had one that was a unique property and you had an extended listing agreement on that because it takes so long for those properties to get sold. So you can do longer if need be, just depending on the area. Okay, list price here. If it was a manufactured home or if it was probate, conservatorship, or guardianship, you would click there. Compensation to seller's broker. So it is the list price, the commission amount that you're charging. So whatever you're charging here would go in here. If there was any additional amount, typically we don't. I know that we don't do it at our brokerage. Some brokerages do. It's a very gray area. So I elect for us not to do it, but you could charge, some brokerages charge an outside TC fee. Or a brokerage fee. It's really a gray area for outside fees, and so we don't allow agents to charge additional fee to the TC. This here, additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer's unrepresented. So perfect scenario for this, you have a listing, you do the open house, and a buyer walks in who's an investor, and he says, I don't want representation. I'm going to represent myself. Okay. Great. They are well within their rights to do so. They do not have to have representation. However, because even if, say, they are an investor and they've sold, 4 houses, they still have only sold 4 houses, right? So they don't know necessarily, and it's foreseeable that we're going to have extra work that needs to be done because they're not savvy with all the disclosures needed. There's going to be extra work that's going to be required, getting signatures, forms, scheduling inspections, timeframes, contingency removals, etc. So it can be a little bit more, it's going to be more work, it's going to be more work when you're dealing with the listing agent as a listing agent with an unrepresented buyer. Unless they're an agent. So I will say that, but there's an additional amount that you can charge when you have an unrepresented buyer on the other side. Okay. So you can do 1%, you can do, whatever amount that between you and your seller that works out, but you can explain to them that scenario and that there's going to be additional work, or it could take longer. In the transaction, you want to make sure that everything is verified. And so it is going to take extra work to get done. Line here, continuation of rights to compensation for broker identified prospective buyers. So if you have a listing and you have a buyer who wants to take a look at the property, so you show your buyer who you have a BRBC with this listing that you have, and they really like it, but they don't write an offer on it. and then your listing expires. Well, that buyer can't go directly to your seller without compensating you right after the listing expires. You can add in 30 days after the listing period or extension. And that way that helps to avoid any potential buyers that are, going to try to go around you, right? And it's a valid reason, right? If you really were the procuring cause of this buyer finding that listing, then you are entitled to compensation. So if you do an extension on that, then that will kind of alleviate that worry, right? Or they can wait 30 days and so be it. But you can add an amount in here. Seller's obligation pay previous brokers.
I'm
If
sorry. I'm sorry. Is there a limit for that period of time, like
I
30 days or
Yeah, I think it's 90 days. I'd have to look it up. I think it's 90 days.
got it?
Yeah. Okay, seller obligation to pay previous brokers if they previously had a listing, and maybe they came off the market and they approach you and say, look, I want to sell my house. It didn't sell before. And you say, great. And you go to list the property and the broker says, it doesn't expire for another, 5 months and they owe me this commission. And so you want to, we are, but we're not involved in this, right? We don't know that commission. The seller does. The seller had a previous contract that they breached that contract. And so they need to disclose if if they owe anybody else. If they're uncertain, then they need to kind of let you know up front. So especially dealing with the expireds or any of those properties, if you know that you're doing your CMA and you check and it was on the market and it's not, just an easy question to ask, like, okay, well, what happened before? Did you get a cancellation? Did it expire? What happened? And so getting that information up front to just avoid potential issues later on. Okay. If the broker's paying a referral fee, so if this was referred to you, then this has to be marked so that you're paying a referral fee to somebody else. And if you mark that, then the additional forms will be automatically added. The referral fee agreement, the RAD form, and then you do in a referral fee agreement as well. Okay. Items to be included or excluded. Any items included if they're going to leave the above ground pool. Okay. Or the refrigerator. Or anything else, excluded. If the refrigerator is excluded from the sale, say they don't want to leave the refrigerator. Any leased items, so solar or alarm systems, water softener, if it's a rural property, if there's propane tank, if it's on lease, mark that here. Any liened items, if there's a HVAC, solar windows, if they had, the upgraded dual pane windows, smart home features, anything here. MLS and public marketing, primary is MetroList, or any additional. So the Bay Area, if there's an East Bay, or any additional MLSs, you would add that here as well. So our MLS does not allow us to put that their seller is willing to consider concessions. So that cannot be marked, but in any other marketing outside of MLS. And so when we are doing our Wednesday office meeting and we're pitching our listings, you can have conversation with your seller and the seller's like, yes, I'm willing to pay, an extra $1,000 for whoever brings me a buyer. If you bring me a buyer in the next week, I'll pay an extra 1,000 on the commission. So, or whatever discussion that is, we can talk about that at our team meeting. So you can say, hey, pitching my listing, I have this great listing. And by the way, the seller has said that they'll offer compensation and also an additional $1,000. So if we mark that, then we can market that outside of the MLS and you can have that discussion openly and say that the seller is offering additional compensation. But ours here, it says in the MLS, if it's permitted by that MLS, ours are not. I do think in the future, We probably will have that option again, just my 2 cents. The biggest issue was MLS did not give us an option. You had to put in a compensation amount, so that it was really MLS's fault, not ours as much. But MLS didn't allow it to be an option, and so you were forced to put that you had to pay somebody, which is why we had the whole lawsuit. So I think it'll be probably added back in and just in a different way in the future. So anyways, going down here, so broker and seller duties, timing of the offer, just standard, you present them, as they come in, as soon as practicable. Or if you're meeting with the seller, say there's multiple sellers, it could be a, divorce type situation, or, selling in a trust, or multiple sellers. And you can say, look, we are going to present offers, 1 week after we list the property. So we'll review them. We're going to list it today on the 11th. We'll see how the week goes in the weekend. Any offers that come in, we're going to meet and discuss together 1 week from now. So you can do that. It's usually when there's multiple sellers, or sellers that aren't, acting kind of, together, if you will. But other than that, it's just as offers come in. Okay. So the next one is the buyer supplemental offer letters. So seller instructs broker not to present offer letters, or seller instructs broker to present buyer letters. If seller requests or relies on buyer's letters, seller's acting against broker's advice. Okay. These are called, the slang word for it is love letters. And so we used to have those quite a bit. They would come in pretty frequently, where a buyer would write a letter with their offer and say, we're a great family and we're happy to be in this neighborhood. We're going to call this home our own. We love it. We have, 3 kids, and the school is right down the street. And, our kids go to Catholic school. It's the private school right down the road. And we're so excited, right? Well, what happens is, so say their offer doesn't get accepted. Well, they say, well, it's because we said we go to Catholic school, and we don't think that they have an issue with Catholics, right? And I'm using that just as a, kind of a random, but it opens your seller up for the potential to a fair housing issue by stating personal information. The more personal information about the buyer, the more it opens everybody up to a fair housing issue. And so it could be, so we don't advise that they do the love letters up front because of that reason. So
Is it, in your experience, is it something that how often do you see them writing these type of letters?
I used to see it often. So, but this is, probably a decade ago, but it hasn't been popular since this, but it was often, like, I would receive offers with pictures of the family as well. But it's been years since, because of this, for the fair housing, they don't really, it's discouraged. And so we, like, as brokers, we don't advise that they do accept those love letters. I will say this, in my experience, the love letters, when it's family to family, have always seemed to be helpful. And so when we did receive them, and this is, again, probably a decade or so ago, when I did receive the love letters, it seems like it would be helpful, right? And sellers love selling to, like, a happy family. So I personally never had an issue with it. I would receive them when I had investor sales, and they don't read them, so I never had an issue with them, personally. The investors are like, I don't, we don't care, about the love letter. We'd rather not read them. So, yeah, but we just discourage them. I did have a house I sold, it was last year, and there was no, exchange of the love letters. However, when my clients bought the house, they moved in, and the sellers had written up an entire, huge letter to them about the property and then the history, and it was just really nice. So it is nice. It's that added touch, but again, it's done after the fact, and so it's okay. But so there was that really nice and family feel and exchange from one family to another, and so that's the warm and fuzzy part of it, and that's, like, I don't know, probably one of the good parts of our job, right? Is when people are happy and when family goes into the next. Um, but yeah.
The reason I asked, and good thing you brought this up, was because I had a buyer, and she was a single mom with two daughters, so she wanted to play that card, and I was like, well, I haven't heard that lately, but yeah, so that's why I was asking, how often do you get these type of suggestions or letters? But like if for example in that case, if she would have brought it up again and wanted to write the letter, should I just say let's go for it or
I would say
try
no.
to okay.
Yeah, no, because even this here, it says there, sellers acting against broker's advice. So they probably won't be allowed to even, so if they mark this, right? So if this is not marked, then they can't view them anyways. And so you could tell your clients this, how, even if you wrote the letter, sellers are not authorized. They're acting against their broker's advice if they were to even read the letter. So your letter won't make it to the intended party. We don't, because it's a fair housing issue, they won't read the letter.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
Perfect. Yeah.
yep. So you can just let her know that they won't, um, but yeah, yeah, it's a tricky situation because it's like, oh yes, great. I would love to help a single mom, two kids, getting into her house, fantastic. I mean, that's me personally. I'm like, okay, good. I'm gonna make sure that I do extra, finishing touches. Oh, are they girls? Are they boys? Okay, which room? So that's, my point of view. But what if somebody's like, no, I don't, I have something against single moms, right? And then we have discrimination. And what if they don't, for whatever reason? They have an issue with that. Maybe they're like, no, why is she single or so, whatever, right? Whatever the discrimination reason may be. And your client says, hey, I think this guy over here has a problem with me because I'm a single mom. And then it opens up the fair housing can of worms.
Definitely, yes, I see it. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. You're
But
welcome.
one thing that I've done more recently is once I close escrow, I'll actually share with the other agent because I've had great agents on the other end of my transaction. So I'll send a picture and say happy family, but it's after the close, and they appreciate that, and they can share that with their clients then.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because I mean, we love that. I mean, I know I personally do, and everyone's happy, like a closing, right? After you're done fighting about
Yes.
negotiations or
Yeah.
repairs, right? You're like, yay, everyone's happy. Seller's
Right.
happy to exchange it to, their family or whatever, and then the new family's in there and they're happy, and it's just, all the good feels. But yeah, just ahead of time, we gotta limit it. So, okay. Let's see. Now, okay, so my investigation reports. NHD, we have that automatically marked because the seller, even if there's certain seller exemptions, if it's in a trust or it's an REO property, however, natural hazard disclosure is still required across the board. So there's no exemption for providing that. And so we let the seller know they do have to provide that. That is, if it's a natural hazard area, if it's earthquake zone, fire zone, high fire hazard area. So it'll have that. It also goes over taxes. If there's any special tax amount or supplemental taxes, it has that in that NHD report. So we always ask that they include that in there. Um, they can, and again, this is a matter of, so it's not customary that we do all these inspections up front with the seller. Okay, so you don't have to, it's not necessary. However, some do. So it's a matter of agent preference. Charlene might say, here's what I recommend, client. I recommend getting all these inspections up front. That's why we know what we're dealing with. Great. Other agents say, let's look, we can take the approach. It is the buyer's duty to do all their investigations. All we need to do is disclose known things, provide an NHD report, disclose known things about the property, make the property available for inspection, and the burden is on the buyer to perform all their inspections and investigations, right? The seller doesn't, they're not required to, they don't need to. So it's going to be a matter of your style as an agent and your preference on what you do. If you want to get these reports or inspections. I think Michael does, and that's the way that he works his business. Fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no wrong or right way to do it. Sometimes just depending on the property, if it's a fixer and maybe they're, want to get everything done up front or at least know what they're dealing with, you can do inspections, but they're not required. So, having that discussion with your client, maybe the client says, look, I don't want anything done. The property is fine. I'll tell you everything about the property because I've lived here the past, 3 years and it's great. And it was a new construction, right? So you don't have to do anything except for the NHD report. Exceptions to ownership or title, if there's anything here on the property. Example is, I dealt with this recently. Person's spouse passed away, so they were waiting on the death certificate. So you can put, something in there to that effect. Okay, so this one gets hidden here a lot and sometimes misses. Seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property as part of the transaction. So this means that they have to find a replacement property in order to sell, and that will also be addressed in the offer. So in the RPA, once your listing goes into contract with that buyer, that will be included in that as well. Okay. Seller opts out. If they do not want a lockbox or signs, then that would be marked here. It's again a matter of preference with the seller. If they don't want a lockbox, I have had some that are like, absolutely not. I don't want a lockbox on the property. Okay. Or signs, because maybe they don't want the neighbors to know that they're moving. So it's their choice. If they want to sign, if they don't want to sign a lockbox, then those would be marked here. Any additional items would be listed here as well. Like Charlene said, you could talk about the price drop right here. If no offers or showings within 2 weeks, seller hereby agrees to a price drop. And then we would do a modification of terms, but you can add that in additional terms here as well. And then we could just do a modification when the time comes when we actually do the drop, because we might not need to do a price drop if we go into contract. So, okay, we're getting close on time, so I want to go over the MLSA. So this is probably one of the biggest questions we get asked. This is about the okay, so the multiple listing service addendum, this automatically gets attached to the listing agreement. And this talks about the MLS, right? What's the MLS? But this here on page 2, we do have clear cooperation in our MLS, and so it does apply. So clear cooperation means that the property can't be marketed outside of the MLS. It's basically like a pocket listing. When you have the listing, but you're not marketing out to the general public just yet, right? So you have a shortened period where it's not clear cooperation. You're maybe listing the property to just KW agents, or you want to just put a sign up and, see if you can double end the deal. So that's when they're referring to clear cooperation, they're talking about agents, and this is addressing kind of a very specific issue. This is for a seller who might be under the impression that they're getting the highest and best offer out there. And however, the agent maybe on the other end is not advertising it, and they're only advertising it to their potential buyers. That way they can earn double commission. So that's where this stems from. The clear cooperation is it's really trying to protect the consumer from agents who aren't trying to market it to everybody to get the highest and best offer. So that's MLS's philosophy, is that the more people that see it, the better, higher offer you're going to get, because you have a better chance of getting that. I, respectfully disagree with MLS in a lot of ways, because I know that sometimes clients, they like to deal in-house, and it also is their prerogative too, who they sell it to. So, so going down here to the marketing. Okay. So here is probably the biggest issue, because we have to have the property technically, once you get the listing signed, it has to go on MLS in 3 days. And so this right here, the marketing option would be, you could put a different date. So say the listing gets signed today. So you can do an opt-out date. You get the listing signed today, photos going up tomorrow, and you're going to list it on Thursday because you have an open house that weekend. Or say you want to do it Friday. Okay, so that you could mark that there. Listing, it begins not at the listing period, it's going to begin on that date. Okay, it still has to be input in MLS within 3 days, but that is the date that it will start being marketed to the public. Okay. Coming soon, we don't do coming soon. So coming soon again is, the signs and that advertising ahead of time. And so it's not allowed. So again, my kind of contention with MLS is because I don't necessarily think that that's always for the best. I think that it's kind of putting a restraint on what sellers are able to do to sell their property, because they're putting a restriction on us. But that's just my 2 cents and my opinion. If there's an office exclusive limited exposure, so this would be that it only is going out to the office, right? And then you can begin the marketing full exposure and say you want to keep it office exclusive only. And at the end of the month, it can go full exposure. Most of the time, what we're going to do is, take that out, is we're going to just use this here. So marketing option here, with the on market date here. So, and let's see. I think, yeah. Okay, that one, is there another form I want to go? No, I think that's it. Okay, and we have perfect timing. We went a minute over. So do we have any questions?
So Lisa, this is Michelle West.
Hi.
Just to be clear, if you have a client who's going to take a couple of weeks to get their property ready, you're just having to enter this into the MLS within the 3 days, but
Yeah.
as long as that date specifies that they need the 2 weeks or whatever, you're fine.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep, I know. It's interesting that we have to put it in MLS within 3 days because I don't necessarily agree with with that because it does take time. So we go out, we take the listing, and okay, here's our checklist. Here's our hit list of things that we have to get done in order for the property to be ready. So it is a little bit yeah.
And then one other thing though is like, what if the client says, look, I really want the biggest bang for the buck. I really want there to be a coming soon. I mean, that to me seems like it would be such an advantage for the client.
Yeah.
What is the reason that that's not allowed? And are there any exceptions if the client insists on it or specifically asks for it?
Yeah, they can do an exception. So we can definitely write that in an exception. I had one, she didn't want her parents had given her money to buy the house. She was selling it. She didn't want anyone to know. She didn't want it to be out there. She said, "Can you sell it? Can you try to find a buyer? Because I don't want it advertised because I don't want my parents to know. Because if it's out, right." So in a case like that, people should be able to sell their property and dictate how they sell their property. But
Sure.
we're heavily regulated. And so, yeah, there are exceptions. We can have that written up in the contract. It's to avoid the small percentage of bad apples, the small percentage of listing agents that are out there that are just going to take advantage and try and get, double commission. So
Sure.
it's really this very small percentage, but it affects everybody. But yeah,
Okay.
so we can, and then there's some kind of Zillow things rolling down, as well, where it's coming soon. So we are kind of, and this is within our office, we're working on clear cooperation and kind of some of the beneficial loopholes, right? I think that MLS maybe went a little too far with the clear cooperation, but rightfully so because of the lawsuit. And then we'll probably regulate back a little bit because it's not always beneficial to the consumer to have constraints on how we market the property. We have people telling us what to do when we know our clients, we know the market, and we really they should be able to sell it however they deem necessary. So yeah, there's just extra loopholes to work through. But if you ever come across that, call me or feel free to run it by me, and then we can work it out in the contract how it's, to make sure that we're compliant.
Yeah, that's great. I have one right now, which is why I asked. And so I will definitely be in touch. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay, any other questions? Okay, guys, go get some listings. Have a good week.
Thank you for your time today.
All right. No problem. Bye.